Eric, why don't you just start out by telling us a little bit about you? I know that you came to this program already working. You have a family, like I said before, so I'd love to just start out with an introduction to you.
Absolutely. My name is Eric Hazard. Currently, I work for an organization called Vested. We're an integrated communications agency based in New York City. So what that means on a day-to-day basis is that I look after a portfolio of financial services clients, which is my area of background and expertise. For any Philadelphia Phillies sports fans, one of my clients is SEI, who has been a sponsor for the Phillies for the last 2 years. So I've done a lot of public relations work with SEI, which is based in Oaks, Pennsylvania, but also the Philadelphia Phillies PR organization, which I will say as a Mets fan kills me a little bit each and every time, but sometimes we have to put these things aside. But I look after some other large financial services clients. I'm originally from Texas. And I went to high school in Texas. I started my undergraduate journey in Texas as well. And then life took a turn, and I actually started as a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. So my career and background started in financial services, and that's kind of led me through. And so I was a financial advisor at Morgan Stanley. I worked for the corporate treasurer at Michael Stores, the arts and crafts chain. They were all headquartered in and around Dallas, but I had a dream, and that dream was to move to New York City because I was in my 20s and it seemed like a wonderful idea at the time. And in 2003, I made that dream a reality. And I moved to New York and I worked for a publishing company that focused on financial services. So I wrote for trade publications focused on the market that was my background and expertise. I did that for 5 years and then I pivoted into public relations. It's a very common pivot for people in broadly media and journalism where they have a writing background and they go into the public relations side. So I've since 2007, that's where I've done my primary focus. So that's the bit about me. I guess I'll say too that I've lived here since 2003. I lived in New York City. I then met my wife, who was originally from Bergen County, New Jersey, and it's a tale as old as time. That is now where I live. So we have two children. They're 9 and 7, and I commute in and out of the city. So that's life for me now.
That was a perfect introduction, Eric. Thank you. And I did not realize you were originally from Texas. I thought you were a Jersey guy through and
No, I do
through.
a very good job of masking it. Um, and then it gets even more complicated when I try to explain all the different places I've lived. But another
Yeah.
conversation.
Well, so glad you followed that dream to the city. That's very, very exciting. So, up next, Eric, can you tell us what initially drew you to the BAS program at Penn LPS Online, and what did you hope to achieve when you enrolled? So, kind of the pre part of all of it.
Absolutely. And that's why I mentioned my employer at the very front end of my background, because my employer is very generous. And one of the things that they give is after 4 years, they give continuing education credits. And so I said, well, I should take advantage of this. And what I thought I wanted to do, and I did, in fact, at Penn LPS, is I wanted to study creative writing. And so I went and I took a survey of a number of creative writing programs, and they needed to be a few things. They needed to be something I could access from anywhere. They needed to be asynchronous. There's something I could do on my own. And I found a program at Berkeley. I found a program at Emory. I found a program at UCLA, and I found Penn LPS. And I got it down to UCLA and Penn LPS. And what I liked about the UCLA program is that if you graduated with the creative writing certificate from that program, is it gave you preferential consideration for their MFA program. So a lot of people, if you're considering a Hollywood career, if you want to get into screenwriting, that might be a program you choose. What I liked about the Penn LPS program is it offered college credit. And it was super simple, as I'm sure all the people here on this call know, being able to fill out the application, working with the admissions department. I just felt like, to me, I couldn't believe it was true. And I kind of had to keep going through this. I'm like, no, 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 this is the real Penn, like the Penn you've all heard of. And all I had to do is spell my name correctly on the application, just make sure all the deadlines worked out. But here I am. So that's what brought me in was the creative writing certificate.
And how neat that you were able to choose something so liberal artsy, right? And translate it into this career that sounds super multifaceted. So that's really cool. And also, I don't think I had realized creative studies to MBA. That's an even cooler
I know,
connection that you've been able to make.
I know. And it kind of was a circuitous route. But I like to tell people it's not a linear journey. And I just kind of allowed it to go the route that it went. And really, even inside of creative studies, if I hadn't taken modern contemporary poetry right off the bat, I don't know if it would have gone as well as it did, but I just fell in absolute love with the whole thing. The curriculum, the instructors, the Canvas platform, which is actually a huge part of the story. And that to me showed what would be possible in this sort of environment.
Very well said. Very well said. So my next question for you is about how you saw the work that you're currently doing, like that practical application, how you saw that in the curriculum. Because something that we're very proud of is this applied degree. So how did that connection work for you?
I mean, very directly working with you in the art of work, we put together our portfolio. And so actually taking a moment to reflect on it through the academic setting really helped me get that together. But what I found is that as I tell people my career journey, I have a lot of different experience, and sometimes I just forget all the different things I'm fortunate enough to do. And so I had a number of different courses that asked me to look at some of my influences. And so there was a creative writing course now, and I think it was the writing about place. And we actually did a mapping exercise where it's like looking at your influences, and I did an influence mapping exercise. I have brought that influence mapping exercise into my professional career because a lot of times I work with financial services companies when they start a public relations program. And I'm really trying to understand when you do something like that, what you're really trying to understand is what the narrative is. What's the story that you want to tell broadly out to your community? And so I'm asking them, like, who are your influences? And I've used some of the structure from that writing about place course to help guide that conversation. So certainly like thinking of the creative application side of it, that's been a big part of it. But also just the way that certain courses were structured from a curriculum and syllabus perspective is really helpful for me as well. It's like there's an introductory course and what the introductory modules will cover and how that continues out over 8 weeks or even over a full semester. You can build that into a strategic communications plan, or you can even build it into how you're thinking about graduate school.
Which leads perfectly into my next question for you, which is what inspired you to pursue an MBA after completing your BAS degree?
It was one of those life ambitions. And I just always thought I'd want to do it. And I basically, for most of my life, just said, I told myself no too many times. So when I started getting into the BAS program and realizing that I'd be able to go through it and complete the degree, then I said, okay, well, what's next? And I said, well, why would I want to do an MBA? And actually, even like I'll back up one more step. When I first started thinking about graduate school, I thought about an MFA, the Masters of Fine Arts. And I thought, I'm going to take this creative writing thing and just let it run. But then the practical side of me came in, the Capricorn rising, and said, well, is this actually going to be something I could use? Or would it be a fun thing to tell people about at parties? And so I just did the kind of classic Franklin method and just pros on one side, cons on the other. And I realized that probably the MFA is not now. It may be in the future, but it's not now. So then I said, okay, if I'm going to focus on an MBA, why would I want to do it? And I wrote down 7 objectives. And I went back and reviewed my spreadsheet that I did whenever I started this program. So my 7 objectives when I started the MBA search were I wanted to do career longevity. How do I extend what I've been doing now? Increase my earnings potential, career field diversification, because right now I'm very focused on communications. What else might I do with that? My professional network expansion, utilizing the continuing education benefit, which I mentioned before, potentially becoming an adjunct professor after graduation, and then ultimately lifelong learning. And so all of those were the reasons why I said I should look at an MBA because it would help me accomplish those life objectives.
That is pure music to my ears, as you already know, right? Because I have conversations every day with folks who are interested in graduate school, and I love graduate school. Went on to go get a terminal degree, just really find it to be such a wonderful place, but you have to know why. You have to know what it is that's driving you, and the fact that you took the effort to actually write them down and make them into very tangible objectives, I think just, uh Such a wonderful process. And so for those of you who are maybe on this call thinking about any graduate school, but especially an MBA, make sure that it aligns with what you want to do after that, because that oftentimes can really help dictate whether or not an MBA or even graduate school is right for you in this particular season of your life.
And
So
if I expand it one step
please,
further, go
yeah,
back,
please.
I was considering MFA. So once I like looked through the lens of NBA and I got my objectives down, then I went back and looked at an MFA again, and MFA fell short on some of those. Career longevity, probably not. A Master's of Fine Art is not known for long, extended careers in creative writing. Was it going to increase my earnings potential? Unlikely. Is it going to help me expand my professional network? Unlikely. So it would accomplish some of them for sure. But when I really narrowed down those seven, I had to go all in because as we're going to talk about, it's a lot. Once you go through this entire process, you've got to be committed to it.
Yes, it almost feels like a full-time job, right? On top of or another college course to, take the time to really go through the application process and as you're saying, search and select programs and all of that. So tell us about how your BAS degree prepared you for the MBA application process. So were there specific skills or courses or experience that you thought, oh, this makes me extra competitive as I'm applying?
I mean, certainly the art of work because it really like let's put together that life portfolio and it helped me because a lot of these programs have a personal statement. So actually my thoughts have been organized in a pretty efficient manner so that the personal statements I could do pretty quickly. I mentioned modern contemporary poetry and just because I love that course so much. And what it did is it helped me to understand that asynchronous learning is something I could do. And not only could I do it, but I could thrive in it. And that kind of like, as we go through the evaluation process, the asynchronous component was so important to me. So it wasn't just that there was one other course after that. It's really about understanding the way that asynchronous programs are developed. And that gave me the foundational knowledge I needed to be able to ask the right questions to the MBA programs. Because a lot of them, if you went online and you read their website, they would say we're asynchronous. Okay, now the asynchronous experience that I had with the BAS program was asynchronous, truly. I never had to go onto the Penn campus. I did because I just loved it, but there's no reason I had to. And I had an opportunity to learn from people literally all over the world. Some of these other definitions of asynchronous I found out were not aligned with my definition of asynchronous. And they're like, well, certainly, you're going to be on your own path after you join us for your week orientation program. Okay, that's not asynchronous. So I actually had to go through and interrogate the MBA programs to really narrow it down to find the one that would be ultimately what aligns with all my objectives and my life situation. So just having gone through the whole BAS program, I really understood better what it is that I needed to do and how I needed to set myself up so that I would find the right program for me.
Yes, it's funny you say that because I'm thinking, a lot of times when folks are looking for jobs, they're looking for remote jobs. And so it will say remote in the little tiny field above. And then you look down and it's like, must be in the office
Yeah,
25% of the time. Or, it's kind of a gotcha. It's not a true. So yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of that process, walk us through how you actually selected your MBA institution. Like what and the application process. What did that all look like for you?
exactly. So I'll go all the way back to the very, very beginning. When I first started thinking about an MBA, because my MBA knowledge was viewed through the lens of my peers and colleagues and friends who had done an MBA. And my experience was that there was only two ways to do it. Now, I'm about to tell everyone I found out that's not the case. But in my mind, when I was going through this, I thought you were going to either do an MBA one of two ways. You're either going to go full time and abandon your career and say goodbye to your family. And for 2 years, that's all you're going to do. Or you're going to do the executive MBA, which is nights and weekends. And that, again, just seemed like a lot. So that's part of what the MFA part of this is so important because I initially started the search for graduate school through the MFA lens. And in MFA, that actually had more of an in-person requirement where they want you to do writing residencies and other things. but they were definitely more than on the asynchronous and online thing. So having gone through the BAS program, I realized like I don't think that an MBA has to be those 1-2 dualities. I think there may be something else. And that led me to realizing there's an entire world of online MBA programs. And so I started there. And I just said, like, okay, the first criteria is it has to be online. And there's enough Googling around, you can kind of figure out where there's three main resources that I use to kind of figure out who had an online MBA program. I used the Princeton Review, I used US News, and I used a site called Poets and Quants. And Poets and Quants is probably the worst labeled site in the history of websites, but it's actually a website devoted to finding MBA programs. You would never know that from the name, but it's a really great resource. So I just started with those three sites. And then I just said, and then just the way that my mind works, I said, oh, this is a lot of information. I'm going to have to figure out an organizational system to process all of this because I'll never get through it. So I just said, well, how many of them have an accreditation? And there's what the AACSB accreditation. Like, let's start there. The program has to be accredited. And I got down to 1,020 institutions. Okay, but already, like, so, okay, we're down to 1,020. So then I was like, well, this isn't going to help me, right? So what is it that I need? And I kind of talked about it needs to be asynchronous, it needs to be online. That evaluation came later. So then I just started kind of going through it and I developed my own metric. And my own metric was, well, what is the ceiling that I'm willing to pay for the education? And I basically just established it at whatever my yearly stipend is, my allowance is. I don't want to exceed that if I can help it. So I started there. And what that did is it took out the top end. So if you have ambitions and you want to go to Michigan or Carnegie Mellon or Indiana Kelley, all of those programs have online MBA programs. They're extremely well ranked. They're very highly rated. You're going to get a quality MBA education, but they're also expensive. At this stage in my career, I couldn't justify the other side of that, like the value that I may achieve from that. So I just took those schools out. There's nothing, but that's no knock against them. They are really quality institutions. They just weren't going to fit for my budget. So then I'm kind of like sitting in this budget, and it's roughly the ceiling I set was $50,000 all in. And that what I kind of like as I continue to do my evaluation is I realized that a lot of these programs give you a set number of years to complete the degree. And it's roughly 6 to 7, depending upon the program. Don't quote me on that exactly. I'm just kind of giving a range. So I just kind of back into, okay, what's $50,000 all in? So then I looked at tuition, kind of worked that out. So you get kind of like a number. And that narrowed the field down to probably about 50 schools. So that 50 is where I really concentrated on. And then from there, as I'd kind of go through the rankings. I was like, well, I could just pick the number one online program inside of that criteria, but that didn't necessarily meet everything else that I needed it to. So some of it is like I'd had to heard of the school. You know, I'm sure they're great schools, but if I've never heard of it, like if I can't tell you where it is in the map, I it's just not, that's part of it. The second thing I did then too is I looked at what I could figure out. And this is a hard number to get to. And I didn't think it'd be a hard number to get to. But what schools do I think have a large alumni base? Because that then helped meet the professional network expansion. Surprisingly, the programs don't, I would figure that would be information they would brag about, but you can find it pretty well for the undergraduate, but it's really hard for the graduate schools. So I kind of did a bit of research and figured out what I think those are geographically, how many of them are in the greater New York City, Northeast corridor area. So I did some of that as well. And then I kind of came up with a metric and it kind of got me down to what is it looking at, like 10 schools that I looked at. So then I just said, okay, I'm just going to start talking. Before I did anything, before I put one thing down, I was like, well, then, okay. Then I looked at and I said, what are the requirements? Because I think that was one of the questions as well. What would it take to get into the school? And I'm 47 years old. And at this point in my life, I don't really want to take a test. And I thought, am I going to have to take, one of the GREs or something? So if I could prefer not taking a test, I'd rather not. What credit I'm going to get for being old, those sorts of things. And so I got down to this kind of list of 10 or so schools. And I worked out like the ones that I thought looked pretty good online. Then I just did something simple. And I just went onto their web forms and I just sent information request, which by the way, the UPenn email address is a great resource for that because now it just all of those follow-up emails that have been going on for years now just get buried in that UPenn inbox. So I'm really sorry to the UPenn email administrators, but yeah, you're just going to get those forever. But I just filled it in. Now, why was that important? Because there are some schools that just never got back to me, like the simple form request. And I'm not going to burn any schools here. This is not what this program, that this conversation is about. But if you could not get back to me on the simple form request, you fell off the list. I need to know that there's going to be some ability for us to like communicate with one another. And it goes back to my experience when I applied to Penn because the admissions department at Penn was super responsive and just very helpful and walked me through everything and made sure I was comfortable. So I needed to have a very similar experience. So then I kind of like got it down and knocked out a couple of the schools. So I ended up having a conversation with, I'm looking at my list, six of them, maybe seven. And I wrote down my list of questions. And what I needed to understand, what I couldn't get from the websites of most of them were tell me how you define an online asynchronous program. Is there any in-person requirement? I needed them to tell me yes or no. Did you have any prerequisites? Which was an important question. If I didn't meet the prerequisites, did I have to take those as part of the curriculum, or is it something that I could do as a separate supplementary educational program? Because as I was evaluating this, I don't have a lot of mathematics background. I don't have statistics. I don't have calculus. For some programs, they said you'll have to take a remedial calculus and a remedial statistics program. There's a couple different ways that they offered you to do it. Some programs would send you off to like a Berkeley extension school. You could take the calculus and stats programs through that, which had a cost. Other programs actually offered it as a separate module that you could do online at your own pace and own learning. That wasn't part, you didn't have to pay for it. It was like once you're accepted to the school, just part of your own educational journey. And then some programs didn't require it. But I really need to understand. So I kind of like really went through that. I wanted to make sure I understood how long I would have to finish the degree because I'm not going to load up on courses. I'm taking one course a semester. Um, and what were my other questions here that I asked them? Um, when to apply, make sure I understood the application deadlines. All of them are very different. Is there required classroom hours? Oh, that's an important one. Some of the online programs had required classroom hours. So they might say, if you're going to take the supply chain finance course, it's every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. And you are expected to make that time available, which to me wasn't going to work for my life situation. I have kids, they play sports. I know I don't need to tell Kristen about this. It's insane. So it's like I do my classes at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's when no one else bothers me. So and then I asked if there was any alumni I could speak to. Or was there like a case study? Like, is there something I could read? And were there any scholarships I might qualify for? Which surprisingly not many. I was expecting there might be more, but there's not. So all of that got me down to three schools. And so the three schools that I ultimately applied to were Xavier in Cincinnati, Texas Tech in Lubbock, and Auburn in Auburn, Alabama. And I got accepted to all of them. And that was based largely on my BAS transcript, my strong personal statements, my background, resume, all those sorts of things. And ultimately, I accepted and began attending Auburn, where I've been going now for the last 3 semesters.
Thank you for that very detailed perspective, Eric. I remember the first time you shared, I almost feel like it's a formula, right? Like a mathematical formula. I think my jaw was on the floor because I just think that it's so fantastic how I call it backwards engineering, right? Like you basically backwards engineered your application process so that you were really finding those best fits without having to spend a lot of time and money, having to worry about site visits, all of that. Like you just found, yeah. Again, folks on this call, take note. This is the way to do it. I remember you also telling me, Eric, a requirement was that the school had to use Canvas,
How do
right?
you, yeah. There was a couple programs that I spoke to that used another program. Now, I'm sure it would have been fine, but I just like I was comfortable with Canvas, and if I could remove that barrier of online learning because I already understood how Canvas worked, there was no reason for me to compromise on that. Now, but in the end, when I reflect upon it, if Auburn or Xavier or Texas Tech had said, and I think actually, I don't quote me, I think Tech doesn't use Canvas. They might use, I think it's Blackboard or something else. So I wasn't going to use it as a disqualifier, but more as like, okay, I'm going to take the next step forward with this program.
Yes, very well said. Very well said. So tell us about how your experience has been so far. Like, how's it going? Are you enjoying it? What do classes feel like? How are they different from the BAS classes? Just, I'd love to, even since the last time I saw you, how is it going?
It's going very well. I love Auburn as an institution. In fact, my family and I traveled down to Auburn for their football home opener because we just had to have that experience. Which it's funny because I'm originally from Texas. So as you can imagine, football, big part of the culture. My wife, who I love dearly, she grew up in northern New Jersey and she went to Loyola College in Baltimore. So when I went through, I spent probably 6 months going through this program. And when I came out of the other end, I was like, okay, I've made my school selection. Like, okay, where are you going to go? I was like, Auburn. She's like, I've never heard of that school. And I was like, I'm sorry. What? What do you mean you never heard of it? So it was really funny to me, but I actually kind of found this similar response from a lot of people in the Northeast, in New Jersey and New York. If you didn't grow up in a large sports forward culture, it's not as prominent. So I then became the one man booster organization in the Hazard household. And I was like, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, graduated from Auburn. Octavia Spencer, the actress, graduated from Auburn. I'm like going through like talking about all the alumni as though I went there. But what it did very early for me is it formed an affinity for the institution because they did, and it goes to one of my criteria. They have such a strong alumni network, and they really support their alumni. And there's like such a kind of like really strong sense of being part of the Auburn family. So when we went down, we flew into Atlanta, we stayed in Atlanta, and then Auburn's about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive from Atlanta to Auburn. We're in Atlanta. I'm like wearing the Auburn shirt, and people go around. It's like War Eagle, which is their football saying. And there's like this kind of like sense of community, even like in Atlanta. So those sorts of things, like when you ask me how it's going, I have a real love for the institution, which is super important. And anyone that's a sports fan, I encourage you go down, sit in the stadium with 88,000 other people, and just my goodness, what an experience! We really had a great time. So there's that part of it. Now, from the academic side of it, I started my first semester just doing the prerequisites, which I loved about Auburn is they made a module available on Canvas that did not cost any tuition and it was self-paced. And I went through and I did my initial, it was like financial analysis 101 and the data management statistics, however they called that course. And I just spent a semester just settling in. And I watched the modules and there was like some quizzes at the end of them. They didn't count for any course grades. But how did I feel about it? Because that was very different curriculum for me than what I had done at Penn. Ultimately, Penn, my degree is in what is it? What do we call it? Interdisciplinary studies? I forget, whatever they call it. Independent studies, however that slotted out, where I got the certificates in creative writing and I got the certificates in global regional studies. So very liberal arts, not very analytical. So I really just kind of felt like I got to feel how this is going to go. So I did that and I did it self-paced. I was like, okay, this is going to work. It was a natural continuation. So then I started in the spring semester and I took a leadership course, which I thought this will be a great way to settle in. Let me do the leadership course. How hard can it be? It was very difficult. Very, very difficult. I was not anticipating how difficult that first class was going to be. Now, I don't mean to scare people off an MBA program, and I certainly don't mean to scare people off of Auburn MBA program. We'll kind of come around to where we are today. But the things that surprised me about it were that the online modules were really well done. The professor did an exceptional job, great curriculum. The test, so the course grades were two tests made up 80% of the grade. And then there's a few quizzes that you did that made up the rest of the 100%. Those Yeah, exactly. Like we know leadership sounds simple. It is not. Those tests were proctored exams. I had to download another browser, the Guardian browser, and I had to, going through that experience was so nerve-wracking for me the first time. So I get into this thing, you have to like schedule the proctored exam at a certain time. There's a person on the other end of your camera who's wherever in the world they're based. And they're like, okay, now I need you to show me your driver's license. Now I need you to take off your Apple Watch and put it behind you. Take off the bear. I need to see behind you, and so I had to take my phone, my watch, everything, stick it on the shelf behind me. And they just locked down the screen. It also, when it did that, is it knocked out all of my automatic registration. So when I registered for Auburn, I just did like the strong password. No idea what my password is. So I'm like sitting there. I have no. I'm like explaining to the faceless voice in the camera. I'm like, I need to get into another browser so I can figure out my password because I can't. I don't know what it is. It's just the machine knows. So we eventually kind of worked through all that, but I was so rattled that I just bombed my first test. And I bombed it because it was very specific on the definitions. And I wasn't anticipating that. Now, the professor was incredibly understanding and basically explained to me, like, well, now you understand how the test, what's expected of you. So good luck on the next one. And indeed, the second one I was able to do much better, and I came out with a B. And one of my friends who I actually joined us at the Auburn game, she told me, "It's like, well, they call it B school because you get a lot of B's." And I can see why that is because the classes I think can be a little bit more technical and much more really making sure that the practical application translates into learning and the learning journey. So then I did that in the spring. In the summer, I did supply chain, which I really enjoyed. I got an A in. The thing with supply chain is it really introduced me to the group dynamic in a B school. Now, I worked in some groups in the BAAS program. It was great. The B school group program, it's just, I think, a little bit more intense. Now, from what I understand for people that do full-time B schools, that your group, particularly for your core curriculum classes, you kind of work with your group through a number of years. But with my groups, like the one of them for my supply chain course was assigned to me. For the marketing course that I'm in right now, we had to build our own group. So that was a very fun thing. But now I'm kind of ahead of it, and I realize that what I need in my group. And so when we were doing our introductions to each other in the discussion section, somebody's like, I'm a project manager and I tend to work ahead. And I just jumped right into that thread. And it's like, I would like to join a group with you because I too like to work ahead. You sound like someone would be an amazing group mate. And then somebody else joined us immediately at our three group. So it's really like you've got more of the group dynamic. And in the supply chain course, most of the grade was the group projects, and then you had a final. And the final was taking the group work that we had to do and like being able to do it on your own, which was it was very Excel sheet based. So taking the prerequisite courses I'd done before was really helpful. And I do a lot of spreadsheet work now in my career. So I was able to kind of like, I felt comfortable enough. The supply chain course, it was open book, take home. You had a week to complete the exam, which I felt that's how I do better. Let me kind of test some things. You couldn't share notes with anyone in the class, and I'm not going to violate any honors or ethics codes, but it allowed me actually like work on a spreadsheet and figure out, okay, this doesn't look right. Let me figure out, like, let me tinker with this with the formula until I can get it right. So I felt much more comfortable and I got the A in that class. And then I'm in the marketing strategies course now, and I enjoy it. It's kind of like the blend of those two things. It's the textbook component and the group components as well. And it's going out really well.
I am not surprised to hear at all that you're doing well. And I do remember that you were a fantastic student in BAS 4000 when we're always working ahead. So I'm glad that for that class you found your little core group.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think those prerequisites are really interesting. I can really appreciate part of my PhD had some businessy stuff in it, but there were prereqs. I had to go take accounting one and two at
Yeah.
at another institution before I could start, and I found it very challenging. So I love that Auburn has incorporated this into the curriculum already, and that it's self-paced and that you're not paying for. I mean, I think that's a really smart way to handle it.
And even if to that point, when you go and you're evaluating an MBA program, you're going to see a range of required hours. And that's why the conversation is so important. Because I had to go through and talk to somebody like, okay, of those required hours, how many of them are required for the prerequisites? And when you take that number apart, you realize that they all kind of center in on this 36-hour, roughly, is what will get you to your MBA. But some of them may say, well, we actually require 42 hours, but that's what they want to make sure that you have that prerequisite done.
Yeah, very good to know. Very good to know. Thank you. I feel like you may have already touched upon this, but I want to give you the opportunity to answer again. And if you don't have anything else to add, that's fine. Are there any skills or knowledge from the BAS program that have been especially valuable to you as you're going through your coursework and your projects?
For me, the most valuable is getting back into the academic mode. And, BAS just helped me do that more than anything. If I had tried to do this another way, I don't think I would have been successful.
I hear you on that one. Absolutely. What about, you are a busy guy, truly, right? You've got a full-time position, you're working on your MBA, you have little ones at home. Tell me about that work-life integration and what that has meant to you and how, if you have the secrets, Eric, would just love to know more about how you're kind of taking the demands of business school in stride with everything else in your life.
I apply my life to some certain mantras and just the ways that I organize my life. And one of the things I talk about professionally, and I tell this to my clients and to my peers, is that time moves in a ratio. And so time spent on one thing is less time spent on another. And it's super important when you come on taking on a new obligation like this to understand the ratio. And so if I'm going to devote an hour to studying for an MBA, that's an hour less of something else that I'm doing in my life. There's 24 hours in a day. Like that's just simple mathematics. So I'm not going to be able to extend the day. So what's the hour trade-off? And you have to be comfortable with the trade-offs. You can't try to do things in the same hour, which means it works both directions. So part of it is just the open communication with my family and explain to them why this is important, what I'm trying to accomplish, what it means for us. So part of my journey was with my wife and just like, hey, I think I want to do my MBA and here's all the reasons why. And what do you think? And what are concerns that you have? And is there anything that in particular I should keep in mind? So that initial evaluation about like trying to do an in-person week at some of these other schools just wouldn't have worked for our lives. Now, if I had gotten into Indiana Kelly and gotten a scholarship for 100%, we would have found a way to make it work. But ultimately, it wasn't going to be worth even going for all of that because I could find other substitutes for me. So finding that ratio is really important. And then just understanding too where the balance on that ratio becomes. So my employer is phenomenal and they do their best to help with that balance. So generally at the end of the day, I try to step away from this computer at 5 p.m. if I'm working from home and I go downstairs and I eat with the family and we work on homework or if there's a sporting thing. Like there's like a couple hours of my life, 5 to 7, that's kind of devoted to focusing on the family. And it's focus intentional here, which is I'm not trying to do something else. It's not like I go downstairs at 5 o'clock. It's like, okay, I'm going to work on my MBA while you do your homework. No, 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 no. We're all sitting down together. We're focusing on the homework. We're eating dinner together, whatever those things may be. So when the kids go to bed, that's when the other kind of trade-offs come. It's like now, if depending on where I am in the academic cycle, I'll just communicate with my wife. Like, you know what? I've got this paper I've got to do. I'm going to go in the other room. I'm going to work on it. Is that okay? Is there anything else you needed from me tonight? Is there something else that you needed us to work on together? Generally, she's like, no, 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 that's fine. But there's a communication. Okay, then I can do that at night. But there's a devoted time away from that. But generally, when I find that I do most of my work is at 5 a.m. And it's just the way that I'm wired at this point. I get up at 5, I take a shower, I make my coffee, and I've got a solid hour, an hour and a half of just focus time. And that's why the asynchronous program was so important to me. I could listen to modules, I could read the textbooks, I can go through the PowerPoints, I can do that uninterrupted. So that kind of forms a foundation of it. The other side of it then becomes the weekends. And it just really, the weekends are, who knows, it really depends on any number of things. But then finding a time in the weekend and just saying, okay, by Sunday at 11:59, I have to submit this paper. So let's talk about when it is I'll have a chance to work on it. Okay, it sounds like Sunday morning's gonna be best. Okay, we'll do stuff together as a family on Saturday. Are you okay if Sunday morning if I'm spending time on this? Okay, great. So that it's just the communication is so important.
You bring up such an important point, right? First, having stakeholders, the stakeholders of your life, understand and buy in to what you're trying to do, right? Like really seeing the vision together, but then also using that give and take to determine how to I don't think we've ever talked about time as a ratio before, and I that's brilliant. That is so brilliant. So I can really appreciate how as you have all these things in your life, you're finding ways to communicate through each of the needs. And yeah, I just you I'm not surprised at all that you're of course you're great at that because you're just so incredibly thoughtful.
But let me show you the other side of that. Time is a ratio, which means I'm not keeping up with a lot of things in like pop culture. So people will say to me, "Oh, have you watched this thing on Netflix?" Like, no, I have not. I have no idea what you're talking about. So but I'm very open with them. I'm like, between my family obligations, what work needs for me, and my MBA, I don't really have a chance to watch that. So there's certain conversations that I'm just going to kind of pull myself out of.
I assure you, the only thing on Netflix right now that seems critical to culture is K-pop Demon Hunters.
Yeah,
Just what
yeah,
all the kids are.
exactly. With 9 and 7-year-old, I get a lot of it through them for sure.
Yes. Oh, very nice. Okay, so I just have a couple more questions for you. So I saw Trevor, for example, you posted about a question, but folks, if you have others, please put them in there. I will definitely read them, and we'll ask Eric to give his perspective. Um, so Eric, I think this next section is about like, so what, right? Like, so you've done this, you're working on this MBA. What do you kind of envision happening next for you, and how is that directly tied to the work that you're doing right now or the work that you did through undergrad? Like what does the future look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've worked for my employer for 8 years, and I'm structured in a way that I can work there as long as I want to, really. And I'm very happy to work there. So I don't have to worry necessarily about that side of it. And I know for other people on this session, that's a concern. So I'm very, very fortunate to not have that concern. But if I look at it kind of like very, very broadly, I then think about what the career arc will look like. Because I've now have a 25-year career. And that to me is the midway point. So I've got 25 years in. What do the next 25 years look like? And for me, this is where the MBA becomes very important because what I want to ultimately do is once I've got this degree is attach myself to one of the local universities. Now I live in northern New Jersey. There's a million universities around and there's a lot of really great ones. So when I have the kind of like the degree, find my way into a business department, and is there some sort of program that we could work on together of like strategic communications or communications in finance or whatever it may be? I haven't gotten that far yet. I want to complete the degree and then come on the next side. That then allows me to blend two things, which is my career, but also kind of like what ultimately in life I might want to do, which is I'd love to teach. I'd love to be a professor. I'd love to be in a classroom. I'd love to lead students who are hungry for knowledge and want to improve their lives. And so that is how that would kind of set me up because when I had that conversation with my wife, like, why would you want to do an MBA now? It's like this is going to be my retirement. There's going to be a time in life I'm just like I'm shuffling off the coil of public relations. I don't want to do that any longer. And we're in a place in our lives where I don't have to do it any longer. So this then sets up the next part of I can then find my way into an academic setting, apply my MBA, find courses. So I've already started. I go onto LinkedIn, I just search adjunct professor, New York City area, go, and I see what's available. And there's a bunch of them. So at least, and I've not applied, I'm not going to apply for any of them now. That's not it. It just gives me a sense of at least that exists and it could be a possible point in the future that I can orient myself towards. So that's the long answer. But the other side of it too is just lifelong learning. And as so long as my employer is going to throw money at me to go take additional education, I'm going to take it. and I will acquire as much education as I possibly can. So what's next? Maybe I'll go to the MFA after this. Why not? Maybe I go take other undergraduate courses on something. I have no idea. But we'll figure something else out.
I know
Uh,
we have talked about, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you going to answer Julian's
I'm
question?
gonna answer this question. I did not do a GMAT, thankfully, and I didn't have to. Now, different MBA programs have different requirements for this. There was actually, like, I forget, Texas Tech, I think, was one where if your GPA was high enough, you could file for an exemption and they didn't require it. And I also kind of came in when I was applying was kind of like this post-COVID era where a lot of the universities weren't requiring a lot of testing, but I know some of them are coming back to it. But that was actually one of the things I just didn't want to do the test again.
And Julian, I will just share, I actually was speaking with someone yesterday who's interested in an MBA, but in Europe. And he told me that it's actually become very commonplace in the United States to do the GMAT or the GRE. And he felt the GRE could be a better fit for him. So that was what he was planning to do. So keep that in mind too, Julian. Yeah. I was going to say, Eric, I know we have talked about you as a faculty member before, right? As an instructor, and I think you would be fantastic at it. So I'm very excited for that as an opportunity for you. But as I think Aaron said here, it is so refreshing to hear you think about your life in this lifelong learning continuum, right? That you've kind of had this 25 years of learning and growing and applied experience and now you have another 25 years to go. It's, we talk about, I think that it's the 65 or maybe it's the 55-year curriculum that
Yeah,
folks
exactly.
really should be learning and relearning and unlearn, over and over and over again. So I appreciate that you have embraced that so wholeheartedly. I think that that is really the key to the future, whatever the future holds for us, I think is learning, relearning, unlearning over and over and over again. So very nice. All right, last question I have for you, and then I'd love again, folks in the audience, if you have things you'd like to share, um, give us some perspective for current and prospective students to the BAS. What advice would you give to folks who might be thinking about an MBA? What do you think folks could do to strengthen their application? Is there anything that you would encourage folks with or you wish you had known when you started? Kind of anywhere you'd like to take that will be great.
I'll start with strengthening the application because I know the people that are joining this are like, what do I do? For me, the undergraduate GPA was super important. And the BAS program, the way it's structured, enabled me to really strengthen my GPA. I just think that the BAS program is set up for success. So, kind of like to that point, like stay on top of it. I like to work ahead as best that I could, but do it in a way that wasn't ridiculous. Like I'd communicate with my professors and just say, hey, I've got a business trip next week. Is it okay if I sit like have that open line of communication? And the communication to me with my professors and the admissions departments were super important. Like I just formed those relationships and it's not difficult. Like you go on the website, you click the contact us button, you figure out who it is to speak to, just have those conversations. So if there's an institution that you're interested in, open the dialogue with them and understand what it is that they're looking for because a lot of times too, people will say like, I'm going to do a local area MBA, and that makes a ton of sense for them. And I agree. Particularly where you live, you can have a lot of good institutions. Just go schedule a meeting. That's their job. They're very happy to help you. And it's not all linear and it's not all binaries. So you're going to go on their website like, oh, I don't think I could get in because it says here a minimum 3.5 GPA. No. That's not that doesn't mean you won't get in. And you'll find in those conversations that they actually open up about what they're looking for. So if you have life experience, find a way to bring that forward into the admissions process. How does that life experience really inform what your MBA process is going to be? Why you're doing the MBA is super important. What you bring from your background is super important. So some of the things that I learned in my conversations is that they actually really think about the cohorts and the classes, and they want people with diverse backgrounds. And diverse in an MBA setting is different business experience, different life experience, different cultural experiences. They're pulling from all of those things. So any of those conversations that you have can be super helpful and they'll help guide you along that path.